Let's see this.
Yeah, on and on. The mean.
So there's not a whole lot of new pieces in this new phone, but there's technically more in
Oh,
this
I
one
know.
than the baseline iPhone 14, because this one actually gets a silicon upgrade to the new A16 Bionic and 6 gigs of RAM.
Oh my
Top of the
God.
line, new 4nm system on a chip from Apple.
Why
You
do they
could
keep
tell,
making
though,
them
when they
so
gave the presentation
thick,
in the
bro?
keynote,
They're
that
going
it
back to
must
the, like,
be a pretty
iPhone
minor
5
bump
look.
from the
It
A15
looks
Bionic,
disgusting.
because they went straight to comparing it to the A13 Bionic from a couple years ago. In real life, though, so far it's benchmarked very similar to an A15 Bionic, just slightly above,
figured.
as expected. And that's meant, for me, rock solid performance, fluid animations, and a pretty reliable all-day battery life from both the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. But I'm going to get more into battery in a minute. Also, technically,
The battery life is
internals
pretty good.
is a new set of sensors. It's an improved gyroscope and a better accelerometer to be able to tell if you've been in a car crash or not. Crash detection. Cool feature. So it'll detect
Doesn't
if you've
Life
been in a car
360
crash
already
or
have
not,
that?
and then if you don't respond to the prompts on screen, it'll automatically call emergency services. Great. I'm not going to test that. I'm sure some other YouTubers will find a way to test it. But actually, my question really was like, okay, if you're going to test it, what sort of things do you test? And I guess the answer is accidental triggers. Like, you know how if you run up a flight of stairs or something and you have automatic workout detection on the Apple Watch, it'll go, oh, have you started a workout? Because you've got an elevated heart rate and you just started to run and no, just me? I don't know. I was just wondering if there's other times it might accidentally think that's something else.
Yeah, like
a car
hard
crash
braking
might have
or
happened.
something.
Maybe you've got a D-brand case on it and you just drop it on the floor or something. I don't know. It hits the ground hard enough, thinks it might have crashed. But then the more you look at it, the more you realize there's a bunch of different sensors and factors where it sees, okay, your GPS location was going 60 miles an hour until it hit 0 miles an hour, and the microphones heard a loud noise, and the barometric pressure changed when the airbags went off, and also the gyroscope saw that there was a hard stopping force. It knows you were in a car crash. One more thing that used to be
Fair
in the
enough.
iPhone that's not anymore in this one is a physical SIM card tray. This is actually for the US only, and these phones are
What?
now eSIM only. eSIM isn't exactly a new thing, but not having a physical SIM tray anymore does have its pros and cons.
Ew.
Pros mainly being, okay, it's one less place for water to get in, one less moving part, but cons being that for international travel, if you just wanted to grab a SIM card real quick instead of going through the carriers, that's no longer nearly as easy. I'm going to keep an eye on this because I imagine Apple intends to eventually expand this to all iPhones instead of what it's now, which is just starting in the US only. But then the last internal change for the iPhone 14s, all of them, is satellite connectivity. This is an edge case extra feature that you're honestly hoping you never ever have to use, but in the off
Oh,
chance
where
that
you're, like,
stranded
lost in shit.
somewhere with absolutely
no one's ever gonna
cellular
use
service
that.
at all, you're nowhere near a cell tower. The iPhone's antennas now impressively can also communicate
Cool.
with station and what you need help with. That is also, but bottom line is when an iPhone. Okay, so now we're really getting into the meat of what you really start to notice on these new phones. iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max have some slightly updated 6.1-inch and 6.7-inch OLED displays respectively. So they're still excellent displays on paper with slightly thinner bezels that you won't notice and slightly higher resolution.
Why does it
which you
even
also
have
won't
the
notice.
edges at all, though?
And
It
an
just
even
looks so
higher,
ugly.
bright 2000 nits peak brightness that you absolutely will notice when looking at the phone on like a bright sunny day. It looks great at 100% out in the sun. But the two things you'll notice the most often here are the dynamic island and the always-on display. The always-on display is the perfect example of the classic Apple late mover strategy. Like, this is not a new feature. This has been on hundreds of phones before for many
Bro,
years, but now it's finally coming
fucking
to an iPhone, and so it's
Old
being
ass
done
Galaxy
the
A
Apple
something
way
had
this
always
time.
on display.
The thing is, I don't really know that there's any advantages to this Apple way. So the always on display looks like this. So you hit the power button, you sleep the phone, you put it down, the brightness drops, the LTPO OLED display goes all the way down to 1 Hertz, and you get to see the clock and notifications roll in as if your lock screen is still on, just at a lower brightness. This is a pretty bright always on display.
Yeah,
though.
it
You can see
really
that,
is.
right? Like, you get used to it after a few days, but I constantly was looking over at my phone on my desk thinking it was still on, which is like a lower brightness.
Wouldn't that drain your battery, though?
Yeah, it looks like that all the time. The transition from the home screen to the always on display is really nice. It's got this smooth fade animation, and I think that's the Apple way. Like,
Oh my
the
God,
clock, if
fading.
it's behind something will graduate to the front of the always on display. and it maintains all of the colors and skin tones in whatever wallpaper you were using. So it's not faded or black and white. You still have all your color. If you've got music
Okay.
playing, then your album art is front and center. It is extra beautiful. But I
Cool.
don't really care about any of that, to be honest. And there's also no extra customization. Like, I've seen some really creative always on displays over the years that let me customize and dial in even differently from the lock screen, and I really love using them. Apple's is just a toggle in the display settings on or off. That's
Welcome
it. Me
to
personally,
Apple.
I'm going to be turning it off on this phone.
I mean, I don't have it on my
because
phone
it also
anyway.
seems to be affecting battery life slightly more than I expected. Now, the always on display specifically doesn't show up in the battery settings, so I'm kind of just estimating here based on my behavior. Everything else looks normal, but I am getting slightly worse battery life than I've expected and than I've had on the 13 Pro for the past year. And so I assume that's this. That's a little extra brightness going a long way. It does still know when to turn off, don't get me wrong. If it's in a pocket, it turns off. If you're in sleep mode, it turns off. Even when you have an Apple Watch on and you walk far enough away from the phone that it knows you can't see it anymore, it turns off the always on display. But it
That's
does
kinda
just
cool.
sit here on my desk all day showing me stuff, and I don't really use it all that much, so yeah, I'm gonna pass. But you know what is new on the screen that I absolutely love and will never pass on? The dynamic
Don't
island, baby.
start.
What a
Don't.
terrible name. They felt the need to name the notch. It is such a minor feature in the grand scheme of using a phone, but it's a good one. It's a really good one. So
Don't
here's
start.
what's happening. Remember
Just
the
get
rumors
rid
the
of
new
the
Pro
fucking
iPhone
notch.
replacing the notch with an eye-shaped cutout in the top of the display with all those renders people made? Well, that's actually what this is. It has one circular cutout on the right for a new selfie camera and one pill-shaped cutout on the left for the new
This
Face
shit,
ID
bro.
hardware, which they've shrunk down by about 30% to fill in this smaller area. And then instead of just doing that, Apple has cleverly decided to fill in the gap between them with black pixels and make it one big pill. So then the idea is Apple would much rather us think about the pill as software than hardware. So they built a whole bunch
look
of
at my
software
notch.
features around it. So it just has a resting state
Look at that.
like this, which doesn't
On my
show up in
S22
screenshots
Ultra.
or screen
One
recordings.
dot,
It's
bro.
just a gap.
One dot.
But there are about 30 different things that it does to indicate ongoing activities and background activities and things that are all beautifully animated and super smooth with these fluid physics. It's so friendly and approachable, and all of these things that it does show up in screenshots and screen recordings. The best part is pretty much everything works straight out the box as you'd expect it to. So I had this moment during the first impressions video where I was like, oh, can't wait for Apple Music to use it, but then Spotify to take like a year and a half to actually update their app to work with this. But nope, everything works straight out the box, including
Fair
Spotify,
enough.
because that already uses the Now Playing API. They already had a lock screen widget. Same with SoundCloud, same with YouTube Music and Pocket Casts. So you have album art and the color matching waveform up there while the media is playing. If you tap
I
it,
hate
open
the
app
edge
that's
lines,
playing,
bro.
And if you
Like, just
long
make it
press
an infinity
you actually
screen.
get a widget that pops up with some
I feel like
media
that's more
controls
personal
can scrub
preference,
and
but-
everything. Pretty much the exact same widget that would appear in the lock screen. So this feels kind of backwards. I think a tap should open the widget and then a long press should open the app, and that would just make more sense, but whatever. The point is, it just works right off the rip. Matter of fact, here's everything that the Dynamic Island does right out the box on day one. So it does system alerts, like for incoming calls, connecting AirPods,
Cool.
plugging into the smartphone world in like 18 months.
Still talking
Pretty
about
much
the notch.
guarantee it.
No, the cameras. Here we go.
On and on, c'est toujours.
All right, if you watch enough iPhone presentations, then you know that the Pro iPhone really is and has been all about the cameras. Fun fact, they spent 23 minutes on stage at the September event talking about the iPhone 14 Pro, and 7 of those minutes, about 33%, were just talking about the camera. And so this is the biggest change, at least on paper, that's been made to the iPhone camera in many years. Look at this graph. This is a graph of the megapixel count of every iPhone camera since they first came out. They've been confidently repeating the 12 megapixel sensor since the iPhone 6S. But this year
Jesus.
we got a leap. We got the leap. The primary camera on the iPhone 14 Pro is now a new 48 megapixel sensor. It's
48.
65% larger than the one we had on the 12 Pro. It has a second generation focus shift optical image stabilization, 100% focus pixels, and sits behind a new f1.78 lens. I think we can all agree that's a great set of specs that we expect great imagery from. But really, the more I've been playing with it, it's just more about what the new 48 megapixel sensor
That is a fat
enables.
camera on the
That's
back.
So great. So a new, larger 48 megapixel sensor. That's going to bend down to 12 megapixels for all your normal photos, but you do get the benefits of sharpness and more light gathering from a larger sensor. That
Those
also
look
gives
pretty
you
good.
faster shutter speeds to freeze motion more often in non-perfect conditions. And it lets me take low light photos with a shorter shutter time, which is very convenient. But the larger sensor also gives you a really nice, shallow, natural depth of field without portrait mode, more than we've ever seen from an iPhone camera.
That was pretty
now, other
clear.
phones I've seen do this
I like that.
just as well, but it presents a new set of challenges like fringing and autofocus. But I've been very impressed with how well the iPhone deals with both. Not a whole ton of fringing on close-up subjects, and the 100% coverage with focus pixels has been pretty locked in on tracking subjects and keeping things in focus, even with the shallow depth of field. My only complaint really is the pretty weak minimum focus distance. Things get blurred when you get close to the primary camera, so you got to switch to the macro mode pretty early. Luckily, the ultra-wide has some improvements.
That looks pretty good.
That's not the end of the world.
Okay.
Then 1 terabyte, which sounds like a lot, but then you're also working with huge 5-6 gig per minute.
Interesting. All right. Oh.